Don't forget that you can now listen to the Politicrat podcast on Audible at audible.com and wherever you get your podcasts. Please subscribe now. And thank you for your support. Welcome to the Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Wednesday, November the 25th, 2020. On this edition of the Politicrat, a conversation with Laura Cronyn of Detroit, Michigan, a citizen of Detroit who testified on Monday during the public comment section of the Michigan Board of State Canvassers certification of the 2020 general election for the state of Michigan. The Canvassing Board of State Canvassers voted by a count of 3-0 to certify, with one Republican abstaining. On this edition, a conversation with Laura Cronyn on Michigan, on the hearing, on race and racism, and about the future of Michigan and politics in the state and beyond. All of that coming up next. I have to say that there was a hearing, a public hearing, comment section during the Michigan Board of State Canvassers back on Monday. They were certifying their election results for the 2020 general election in the state of Michigan, and there were hundreds of people that came out to give their public comments about what was happening on the board of canvassers and all of the kinds of things that people were seeing in Michigan, from Republicans in particular, as they began to do some very objectionable things. One of the people who testified at that public hearing on Monday was Laura Cronyn. And I saw her testimony and I said, I have to get in touch with Laura because what she said was very compelling and very important. And she's here. I welcome Laura Cronyn from Detroit, Michigan, to this edition of the Politicrat podcast. Laura, welcome.
Thank you very much.
It's so good to see you. Thank you. I want to first ask you about the fact that you made this comment, and I was really struck by it. And I played some of that comment on an episode yesterday. What I wanted you to do, if you could, is just reiterate some of what you said, if you can recall specifically what you had said during that comment.
Well, I was saying that the people of Detroit, whose vote is being negated, has been negated before. When Snyder was governor, we voted for an emergency management law, and they squashed it. And then we spoke up against a bankruptcy, and our own city council approved it. And so we didn't have any democracy in Michigan under Republican governors. And we lost a lot in the city at that time. Lots of giveaways. It was after the 2008 bubble, and this place was ripe for the taking, and that's what happened. And so when we saw what Trump was doing and saw how people couldn't see it, friends, coworkers, we had to come out and vote, and Detroit did that. And the white people in the rest of the state, or maybe not just white people, but power, so I equate that with white people in this state, they know that quashing Detroit's vote is the way to keep the state red. And we know that getting Detroit out to vote is the way that we keep it in the hands of the Democrats. And so that's what happened, and people didn't want to accept that. And so we have the pushback that we had.
Do you, because one of the things, what you talked about, and one of the things you had said also is that people in Livonia and Grosse Pointe, now I'm assuming they're predominantly white counties or cities, is that correct?
Livonia is one of the whitest cities in the country. The Grosse Pointe might be more mixed, but Livonia is more a product of the white flight. A lot of the people from the area that I live in on the northwest side of Detroit, they abandoned their homes and their churches and their schools to get away from the influx of Black families that were finally getting a chance to have home ownership that's been held away from Black people since the beginning of the country. And so they've gone, and they left a hollowed out city for many years. And in '08, they came back, and a lot of investors, we have mostly renters and not homeowners now. They took advantage of taking people's homes that were behind in property taxes. They've overtaxed us and haven't paid us back yet, $600 million for the past 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 years. Tax abatements for big business. And I can't say that there hasn't been some rising of the boats, but nothing compared to what moneyed people have gotten in the city. And we want our fair shake. We want to have an opportunity to have education. That's one of the main components of the Republican Party is the destruction of education. They kept slaves from being educated, and now they know that they can keep middle America uneducated and get them addicted to disinformation, and then they can have their way. It's open season. They've made more money during this coronavirus, the rich have, than they've ever made in the history of this country. And we are losing everything. So unless something is done, this never successful experiment of equality for all people will never happen. So Trump maybe was necessary for us to wake up.
And obviously the results of this election, over 80 million people voting for Joe Biden and counting, certainly is the wake up to go along with what you've just said. One of the things that you have mentioned is that you are a third generation Michigander. Is that correct? Am I right about that?
Yep. My grandfather was from New York. He was an orphan. And my grandmother was from Philadelphia. And they settled in Detroit. And my grandfather had a lumber yard just a few blocks away. And he made money during the Depression when nobody else did. And he took care of the neighbors around here. He bought people groceries and paid their rent. And he died a poor man, but he had a little bit of money during the Depression. And he raised my mother. And my mother had a sister. And my grandfather used to take her down to Olympia Stadium to take her to the fight. She saw Joe Louis. And when she was a young girl, she told me that she used to see Black people on the trolley car and look at them and recognize the beauty of them and wonder what all the problem was. So that's kind of where I came from. And then when my grandparents passed away, my parents got this house, and I got a house just a few blocks away. And then when my mother passed away, I moved to this house, and my son has the house that we came from. So that's what we've been afforded in Detroit by the exodus of white people and the '08 bubble. Housing was available, and if people would have taken advantage of that back then we would have a lot more Black home ownership. But it was designed to be different. The gentrification isn't designed for everyday people to be able to keep a $10,000 or $20,000 house. You couldn't sell a house for $10,000 after the '08 bubble, but now you can't touch them for $100,000. They were given away to developers and for $500 or $600, and they renovated them, and they're selling them for $150,000 and $180,000, and it's out of the reach for many people, especially Black people. So it's being taken all over again, another cycle. But yes, I'm fortunate enough to be the third generation here.
Wow, it's so good that you have stayed in Detroit as well. You talked about white flight earlier, and it's so good that you stayed because obviously I have to ask you, the testimony you gave, again, it really moved me. It's not because I've never heard someone say this before who is white who said this, because there's plenty of people who have. But you spoke just simply and plainly and directly to the issues at hand that have really plagued Michigan and a lot of other states and a lot of cities in those other states. And you've spoken a little bit to it here. Can I ask you what your background is? Have you been someone who's been a political activist? What is your background in that? And have you been active in politics in any way?
Well, I have always paid attention. Maybe not as much in my 20s and 30s, but my education came from my life. I wasn't dumped into a black neighborhood. I lived in an all-white neighborhood, so the change came gradually for me. So it wasn't a shock. It was just a gradual acclimation to people moving in who were just people. And it was all white, and then it was all black except for a couple families. But the way that it happened, it wasn't threatening to me. I just got to know people. I was in grade school, up until 7th grade. And even then when I went to high school, I had to leave the public schools because they had busing. And I was leaving my neighborhood going to places that I didn't know people. And there were going to be problems. I was going to have to be fighting, and because I was around people that I didn't know. So I went to a Catholic school where many of the white families that stayed here were already going. And when I got to the Catholic school, when I went to public school, the mix was the whites and the black kids got along fine. We were children, going up until 6th grade. And when I got to high school, some of my friends that I went to public school with were already there. And a lot of them didn't want to be friends with me if I chose to be friends with black people. And so I was friends with who was friends with me. And that's how that happened. I worked, I worked at the library just a few blocks away. I've always worked around here. I've lived in the same 2 square miles, aside from going away to college. And, I've lived in the same place all my life. And I feel like it's home. My roots are here. And I love the changes. I love the changes. I mean, we went through a lot. We lost a lot. My kids, I had to sacrifice their education. You have 2 good schools, on each level, and you have to fight to try and get your kids there. And I have grandchildren that are going through the same thing now. And everybody, public schools were great when I went, but the Republican machine understood that breaking education is how you gain power, and black people are always the ones where they take it first because they don't have as much of a voice. They can't fight as strongly against the power. But they're doing it in the suburbs too. That's why you have all these Fox viewers. That's their key. Look at Betsy DeVos. They want Michigan. With climate change, the coasts are going to be on fire or underwater, and Michigan is home to an international border crossing. We are pretty impervious to tornadoes, hurricanes. We have all the fresh water in the world. So 20 years ago, I understood that this was going to be a place that people would want to come because they wouldn't lose as much due to climate. And so, we have to hold on to what we have, and we have to demand that when money comes here, that they contribute instead of take. We pay more taxes than billionaires. We pay more taxes than billionaires. I mean, they may proportionately. And so we want community benefits if you're going to come in here for business. And we want the first chance at skilled trade jobs. And they are doing some of that work. They do have those opportunities. But the opportunities for the regular people in this state or in this city are nothing compared to the benefits that the rich are reaping. The Illich family and the Gilberts, they got 90 buildings in downtown Detroit, beautiful, architecturally beautiful buildings for a song. They get to reclaim some of their employees' income taxes for years. If you don't give any of the money back, there is no money. So it's a fight.
And obviously something that you have engaged in. You've engaged in these issues and obviously works really hard to raise awareness and be actively participating in raising the awareness of a city and a community, and it's very important. And I've always talked about it, by the way, on this podcast, the need for us to get involved in any way we can,
Right.
not just the vote, but also to get involved in the kinds of things that you're doing, and the awareness, activism, educating people, because as you pointed out, education is so important, and the Republican Party has actively stripped it away for decades now. And that conversation, I'm sure, as you realize, obviously, doesn't come up in the corporate news media or anything like that. It's these people on TV talking about defund the police. Oh, that's so scary. But no one talks about the fact that education's been defunded for 40 years at least.
For 40 years at least.
In this
yes,
country.
I mean, if you look at if you drove through the suburbs and saw the schools, and then you went into the city and saw the schools that looked like they might not even be open with children in them, the disparity is shocking. And for people not to want everybody's child to be educated in a nice environment and pay teachers a respectable wage so that you have people going into the field. Look at the beginning of time. Look at how much education was sought after in slaves. Black people have proven time and time again that given the opportunity, they can organize and organize well. And white people historically have not want to see that. And I think it's an unbased fear. I think that maybe the white guilt of controlling and dominating people for so many years, maybe they think that if Black and brown people got power, they would want revenge. But that's not what I experience in Black people. Black people are much more accepting than white people. And I just think they want a fair shake. Nothing more.
Listen, you said it better than I could. I mean, the enslavement of Black people that has occurred certainly continues to have corrosive, to say at the very least, effects today. But I totally agree with you that Black people don't want to get revenge on white people at all. And I think Fox News and all kinds of, and it's not just Fox News and the media, but I think within a lot of individual white people, and particularly if they've been raised a certain way, or they are raised to feel that there's this kind of affront or an attack, and it goes through movies, it goes through culture, and it goes through how you're brought up in the home. And obviously your upbringing, I think, I should ask you, is very different.
Well, it was 50-50. The men in my family grew up like white men. They and with some reason. Like my brother, he left the city because he was a young man and he got his car stolen, and he had a lot of things that occurred. You have to remember that in the 80s, which is when I was graduating from high school and getting older, crack was introduced into America, and it ravaged urban areas. Women were, just addicted, and their parents were raising their children. And we have a third generation of people now that are raising their families with that loss. So, and that was okay with white people. They didn't have to be bothered. But now white people are suffering the meth and the opioid addictions because we are all being attacked by the 1%. We are all suffering. And the division, the cleverness of the elite is that they can take you and I and turn us against each other when we should be uniting and pushing back against the top. That's their game. And they use religion and abortion and race. If you just talk to people, they don't do that. People want to be separate. White people want to be separate. They don't want to share their living existence with people other than themselves, mostly. I mean, the more educated you get, you can see there's more acceptance. But even working in I work in a plant, and you would think that working next to each other for 10 and 20 and 30 years would, you see people that are friends at work. But if there's a party or a social function, it's racially divided, outside of work. And then you saw the people that were voting for Trump, and what other reason could it be? Except for Fox News has brainwashed you, or not just Fox, but that, your 401k has put you on the same level as them, when really we all want, more benefits. We want a bigger piece of the pie for the billions and billions of dollars that we're providing these people. And when you divide along certain lines, then, unions have always been a target. And you would think that the union workers could look at each other and recognize that, but it's just kind of amazing that it's so ingrained.
Yeah, that was one thing I was going to ask you about, the unions, because unions had been in this country, as you well know, the real bread and butter stronghold for people in the 1960s and the 70s. And then we got to Reagan, and I've talked about this many times on this podcast, and Reagan and the decimation of unions, the firing of the air traffic controllers, and then Ford and what happened to Ford in the 1980s, particularly in Michigan, in Flint, in Detroit, but especially in Flint. And you see what's happened to that and how Flint has changed. And now, of course, what we have with Rick Snyder, and quite frankly, I'll be honest with you, the current governor has something to answer for. You can agree or disagree with this. I think the current governor of your state has something to answer for on this too. But Rick Snyder got away with murder, basically. Is that too strong a statement?
No, he is a murderer. He is a murderer. He is responsible for making the change of where the water was being supplied from, and with no scientists, nothing to back it up. They are just a bunch of people put into positions looking at a ledger and not looking at a people. And you better believe if it was water poisoning Livonia, Rick Snyder would be in jail. Understand that. Our problem is we don't look back. The bankers stole the country. They brought down the global economy, and not one person went to jail. Not one person. I understand Obama was the president. He had to be careful. Look at the backlash from just, such a fine man being voted into office, and that's why we have Trump. And they have to pay for their crimes, because our brothers and sisters are being thrown in jail. If you get caught for something, they're going to throw 5 felonies at you, so something sticks. So no matter what you do, you're going to serve some time. You're going to put money in the commissary people's pockets. You're going to put money in the phone pockets. You're going to take opportunities away for employment when people come home. It's systemic. It's another form. It's just an evolving form of dominating a people.
Yeah, this is something that's a real problem. And you talk about accountability, and I wanted to ask you about this. And I was going to ask you in a few moments, but I'll ask you this now, actually, before I get back to some other things, particularly about Michigan. Accountability. You've just talked about the fact that these things have happened and the bankers didn't get punished, and I'll add this W didn't get punished. We can go back to Nixon, we can go back to Reagan, Reagan. All of that, right?
The Iran-Contra, the Iran-Contra. I mean, come on, if you had a group of black guys, or even Arabic, whatever, that exchanged arms with foreign adversaries for drugs to come in and decimate our communities, and then you have Nancy Reagan saying, say no to drugs, but your administration is flying them in here. I mean, come on. But you see what they're doing now that democracy is awakening. Now they want the judicial system to maintain their white power. That it's just by any means necessary is what they're doing. by any means necessary to hold on to their power. These men are 80 years old. They're about to hit the grave, but they want their legacy to continue to have white people control the world. And it's so unnecessary. I mean, you see after George Floyd got killed, the streets were not filled with just black people. They were filled with humanity that's outraged and tired of seeing these things. And maybe they don't know how to help, but their gut instinct is to know that it's wrong. So we have an opportunity, and that's why this is such a fight right now. This is such a fight, because this is the end for them and the beginning of a more perfect union if we can really make things work. But it's going to be, it's fighting against immense power.
And we all have to be on guard and be involved. We cannot make the mistakes, I think, Laura, that we have made in taking eye off the ball when Barack Obama was in. A lot of us turned away and went home, and there were a few activist groups, but not many. Code Pink is one that comes to mind. They regularly, here in San Francisco, I saw them standing outside very affluent houses and neighborhoods not far from where I'm sitting, actually, when Obama came into town here years ago for a fundraiser. So most of us did not participate, but I wanted to just ask you about something, because you talked about the accountability, and we talked Reagan and Nixon and, the Iran-Contra, as you pointed out, and W with Iraq and the war crimes and everything. Joe Biden now, and this is something that fascinates me, and I would love to hear what you have to say about this. Joe Biden now has this incredible opportunity to turn right now and say, okay, Justice Department, I think you should look into this. Okay, Justice Department, here's what I think you should do. And actually investigate and prosecute, certainly investigate to start with, the Trump administration, everybody who in it, and the family. What do you think about that?
They should have been investigated in New York, and he could have never gotten this far. Look at all of this was going on in New York, and he was well known for not paying his bills. It was well known that his father was cheating in housing. All of these things were well known, but the moneyed people don't get punished. Look at Kwame Kilpatrick in jail for 28 years. And the current administration is probably doing demolition contracts that are the same thing that he did, and they're going to get rewarded. So what kills me about the news and the power of the media is that we all know that Trump has to go to jail. We all know that. For this to have any sense at all, for these traitors to our country that are answering to Russia and answering to our foreign adversaries, you cannot even hint that we're not going to look back. I can understand Obama a little bit because of the immense pressure. He had to perform a certain way. He had to. But Biden, with the people that put him there, from James Clyburn putting him in there, and Detroit coming out to vote, and black people and women, we did this because we want this man held accountable, because he's destroyed our norms and he's destroying our democracy. And so I don't want, the media gently shapes you, a degree at a time to, they'll say, well, yes, we're going to investigate that. And then they say, well, we might not want to turn back. You can't let that happen. The pushback has to happen immediately and say, no, this is why you're here. And Biden, he's hands off. Like Holder said, he didn't want Obama to be instructed. But the key is who they put as the AG. You see, they haven't made that announcement. If they give the AG the independence that they need, and they put the right AG in there, just like they have in the Southern District of New York, Biden is supposed to be hands off. It's supposed to be independent. The judiciary is supposed to be. But if he places the right people in there, then it's going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, you are going to see people either check out or rise up. It's one or the other. And I hope it's rise up, because he's there for a reason. Who could believe that Trump would have gotten this close to winning? Who could believe that?
Right. Right.
That these people would say it's okay for this man to have secret conversations with Putin, to have an unsecured line that he's tweeting off of, to have such an imbecile as the head of our country and the damage that he's done around the world, and to not have him pay for that.
Oh gosh.
No,
it's unconscionable. I totally agree, and I mean, look, the stuff with the bounties on the heads of American military personnel. He's not
killing
the
Kurds.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Removing the troops from the Turkish-Syrian border. I mean, my gosh, there's so much there. And yet, looking on Twitter, which is always a minefield, as I'm sure you know. Half the people say, yes, Biden should make sure this happens, and half are saying, oh, no. And there's this thing about healing the country, right? That's one of the things Biden ran on, as you know, apart from coronavirus and building back better, as he put it, was to heal the soul of the nation. And of course, as you know, on NBC Nightly News yesterday with Lester Holt, he clearly made it clear that he wasn't going to try to get in the way and get involved in any potential prosecutions. The Justice Department's going to do that. But it occurs to me that in order to heal the soul of a nation, one of the things you have to do, apart from obviously attending to the very important issue of coronavirus, is to deal with prosecuting and investigating, at the very least, this administration, which has traumatized us for 4 years.
They have committed crimes against humanity. They are killing people with their inaction about the coronavirus. They are killing people. They are letting our allies get killed. They are letting people's whole lives just drop away. Restaurant owner, they are destroying this economy while they are grifting at the top. They are taking all the emoluments clause and just saying to hell with that from the very beginning. It's crime after crime after crime. It is a mob. They're mob controlled. They are mob controlled. And maybe they're just so powerful and so big that nobody can really touch it. But if they don't touch it, then what is going to happen? We're going to rise up, or we're just going to be a third world nation, run like princes living in palaces and the rest of the people living in dirt huts. I mean, that's how else could it go if we don't make these people pay? While the jails are filled with people or being killed for doing nothing and not being held accountable. You got to get all the racists out of the police department. You have to get the judges straight. You have to give more money to public defenders. You have to stop prosecuting things that are having to do with addictions and mental illness and throwing people in jail. Engler was the one that closed all the mental health facilities in Michigan, and they treat mental illness with incarceration. And then you have the people at the top that just continue to have everything unpunished. And I believe that most of the country wants, I believe that the people that voted for Biden want this man and Bill Barr and Pompeo, running around and making deals with foreign adversaries against the American people. It's treason. It's treason. And if you don't punish treason, what do you punish?
Listen, you say it better than I ever could. I mean, it really is. And we both know, sitting here, that the powerful do not go after the powerful. The elites do not go after the elites. But something has to give. I completely agree. I do not think that people are going to stand for this. We have a second Republican Great Depression, which is what this really is. It is we saw in 1932. Well, I wasn't around in 1932, and you weren't around in 1932. But in 1932, as I'm sure you are aware, and many of the listeners are aware, we had Herbert Hoover, the Republican. And prior to that, in 28, he didn't care. Same kinds of thing. Republican Great Depression. He didn't care, and he got beat in a landslide by FDR in 32. And here we are here in 2020. We have a similar kind of thing, close to a landslide, I would say, not quite, but pretty much there. It's pretty much
a mandate for sure.
For sure. And if he doesn't do this is what this could be a real problem in this country, as you've alluded to, Laura, if he does not do anything about this. And I think, as you say, people will be in the streets, pressure will be brought to bear, because this 4 years has wiped out all kinds of people, even people who've not been used to the kinds of things that black people and other people of color and other, poor white people may have seen. People are on food bank lines, yes, all over the country. And so something's got to give here. And he's risking losing in 2022 in terms of the House and Senate races potentially, and certainly 2024 if he chooses to run, or if Kamala Harris chooses to run. That's going to be very serious in this country. I shudder to think he's really inviting a problem if he doesn't do anything about this. You've got the Republicans, as you pointed out before, who go and prosecute for anything that the Democrats never did. The attacks on Hillary Clinton and all of this, spending all this taxpayer money to do these Benghazi investigations, to put Hillary Clinton in front of a House tribunal for 11 hours during her campaign in 2015. She spent 11 hours.
And these people don't even show up to a request to come and speak in front of the committee. And then they perjure themselves all the way through it. They perjure themselves under oath with no punishment. They should have taken, during the impeachment, who would even think we had an impeachment in this country? It seems like it never even happened. And to not remove this man when you know he's wrong, because you don't want your voters to be lost to you in Alabama and South Dakota. And, it is, if that's what a patriot is somebody that will sell their country out to stay in their position, you don't have that position afforded to you in the first place. And we had, Michigan, that we had a ballot initiative to have an individual redistricting, because the districts are carved out so badly. Both parties do it, but the Republicans have taken it to a steroid level to stay in power. And they squashed the initiative. A single woman headed that up, and they had signatures. It was passed by 1 million votes. 25. It was a 1 million vote difference, and the Republicans said, "You're taking away our free speech, and so you can't do it." If people don't have the ability to fair elections, check the voting machines. There's a woman on Jenny Cohn on Twitter. She's been screaming about voting machines. And that man that spoke, John James's lawyer that spoke at the meeting, was talking about computers connected to an Ethernet. Now, I don't know if that was right or that was wrong. And if it was there, it was all places all across the country. Let's check Mitch McConnell and let's check Lindsey Graham if we're going to be checking Detroit. But it's a legitimate concern. If Karl Rove even said, if votes are within 1% to 3%, they can be tampered with a little bit. And Rove was one of the first ones to tell Trump to stand back, because maybe he doesn't want people to look into the small little precincts that might have gotten Mitch McConnell and Stacey Abrams and all those other people that lost by a small margin. They don't want. We have to have legitimate voting machines. We have to have free and fair elections. And they don't want that. Republicans don't want that.
Very true. Mitch McConnell has blocked at least 3 Senate bills, 3 House bills that have come to the floor. And the Grim Reaper's desk is completely full of these bills that House Democrats have passed since the beginning of 2019, including those 3 election protection bills. They were the first things that the House Democrats actually passed in the House in 2019. So again, your point again is very clear and resonant. That this is exactly what the Republicans want, and that this is their remit, and this is what they're doing. I think the last thing I wanted to ask you about was kind of what we kind of started with Michigan, with Detroit. Where you see the political landscape going here in Detroit, in Michigan in general, given this, very clear win in Michigan. 154,000 plus vote difference is a pretty darn good difference here in Michigan, a state that was lost in 2016, and of course we talk about the chicanery and the things that may have happened there. But where do you see Michigan on a political landscape vis-a-vis the election, vis-a-vis socially, as you've been, as you're a third generation Michigander, what does it come down to for Michigan when it comes to these elections going forward?
It comes down to what the Trump administration is fighting right now. They want to negate the black vote. They want to throw in, hard living conditions, making it hard to live so you can't concentrate on much more than survival. We have a lot of violence here, or we have a lot of guys not graduating from high school. And you have to, the protests against George Floyd, I think, cinched Detroit, because you had people come out, and I believe that all those people voted. I want to say and want to believe, because it's very quiet in the city. I rode by some polling places. They weren't overcrowded, so I was like, Detroit's not going to vote the way they should. I was so happy. We voted at, I think, 50 or 53%. We haven't voted that much in 25 or 30 years. And I was overjoyed. And so we have to find a way to let young black people see the benefit of their vote. The Biden administration has to go right into the mayors of the cities, follow Obama's police accountability, community organization on the local level. And people have to start just, the media has to make it important to show people that their vote matters. You have to directly tie a vote to a carrot. You have to give people something. They have to see that their vote matters. Black people, for so long, it didn't matter who was in power. Nothing ever changed. Democrats have to show that their party is going to make life better for everyday people, not just blacks, but whites. The imbalance of wealth cannot sustain itself. If you don't take those tax cuts away from those billionaires, if you don't make them pay their people, if you don't take a person that's making $1 billion a day, give their people $30 an hour, then nothing is going to happen differently. People you shouldn't have to work 65 and 70 hours a week to have a home and a car and send your kid to college. You shouldn't have to work that. You have to be able to have some time with your family. You're the ones that put the wealth in these people's hands. You have to be afforded that. You have to, back in the day, women stayed home. They didn't work, and they were able to take care of a whole family by one person in the house going out to work. So, you have to make life easier for people where they don't have to be on call 24 hours for a management. The demands that they have on people are outrageous. They're outrageous. And
the thing you said also about Democrats have to really show black voters, young black people, but black voters in particular, but black youth, why they should vote is, it's so underlined by two things that I didn't even mention, that we haven't talked about, but I do want to give them mention. The situation, and you know this well, in Flint, where Obama came to Flint and did this thing that I think is unforgivable. This stunt with the water. A lot of black residents were not happy, and I'm not a black resident of Flint, but I'm a black resident of somewhere in this country, California.
Sure.
And I was furious with that. And that I learned about that from Michael Moore's film, Fahrenheit 11/9.
Yeah.
And that blew my mind when I saw that video. And also the raids, the military raids going on in Flint during the same. Remember that? That was not widely known in the country. It was known in Flint and in Michigan, but outside the Michigan and Flint, in Michigan, it generally wasn't known in the country, and I couldn't. And this is a Democratic administration attacking a largely black city, and they have.
But it was a Republican. It was a Republican governor, and you have the military being run by conservative Republicans forever. But anytime that there is a threat of black anger, Look at the riots in '67.
Right.
They called in the National Guard. They called in state troops. They called in federal troops. Look at Brown versus the board. Every time there has been a fight for Black people to have their voice heard for equality or for justice, they are at the ready to throw troops in the street. There's such fear, and the fear is so unfounded. But they don't want to bring the fight this time. Do you think that those Trump people would be riding through these streets here? No, they might go down to the TCF Center, but they're not going to come into the neighborhoods. So they're not going to do that. I guarantee you. They are studio gangsters. They are not coming to where the fight really is, because people are not going to take it anymore.
Right.
They're not. The times are changing. People are not going to take it. And, Black people have achieved so much with so little opportunity. I mean, look at the Black pride and the families that have first generation people go to college. Black women that just get to the highest ranks of wherever they have to be because they work so hard. Going to, if they're not in a historically Black college, going to a college and getting into a sorority or fraternity so they could have, help getting through. And they're high achievers. They move to greatness. And a lot of white people that just take it for granted. That's changing now because school's hard for everybody. Everybody's having to pay a lot for school now. But when you see that when you give Black people an opportunity, they rise to greatness, it should be celebrated and not squashed.
I appreciate what you said there. Black women, absolutely the vanguard of democracy in this country, and really the backbone of this nation. And even before we had been brought here in chains on the African continent, we were doing all of these things and more. Dynasties, kingdoms, queendoms, everything. And as you point out, in the most adverse circumstances here, as enslaved people, we did these extraordinary things and continue to. It's been such a lovely conversation. It's really been a great honor, actually, to have this interaction with you, because it's just important to speak to people who really have a fervent belief that this world needs to change. And they don't have to be the people with the brightest and biggest spotlights. But Laura, it's truly an honor. Thank you so much for being on this edition of the Politicrat podcast today.
Thank you for reaching out to me. And I just want to say that my life, the vantage point that I have, I consider myself extremely gifted, because I've gotten an inside view of culture from many different angles. And I think that I'm so fortunate. I wish everyone could have the opportunity to have lived the life that I've been exposed to.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. Special thanks again to Laura Cronyn, an absolutely lovely individual. Really delightful to speak with her about these issues and the importance of staying engaged, which is something I've talked about on this podcast on a number of occasions, as you know. I do want to also point out two pieces of news that you may or may not have heard on this Wednesday. News early in the morning, this morning, that the Duchess of Sussex in England, Meghan Markle, revealed to the New York Times, in the New York Times, that she had suffered a miscarriage in July of this year. My profound and heartfelt condolences to Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. I do urge you to read the op-ed that she penned for the New York Times, in the New York Times today. I will supply a link to that story. It's a must-read, and it's very potent, to say the least, from Meghan Markle. And the other piece of news from Wednesday that certainly stood out for me and also very sad, the passing of Argentinian footballer Diego Maradona. He died from a heart attack at the age of 60. He was a legendary footballer, one of the greatest that the world has ever seen. I would say one of the 4 greatest footballers of all time. Diego Maradona, who won the hearts of millions and was an ambassador and something even more than that, particularly in his native Argentina, passed away at the age of 60. One of the greatest in the sport of football, and certainly one who had his ups and downs, but always entertained and loved the people he entertained for. Diego Maradona, rest in peace. R.I.P. Diego. Thank you very much for listening to this edition of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.